we have seen a drop of about 15 percentage points in the support of a two-state solution during Ersin Tatar's period, which we think is one of the main reasons for losing the recent elections.
Often what we have seen in Turkish Cypriot elections is a rotation between parties in the right and parties on the left. And when we have parties on the left, we have seen that there is a momentum in negotiations. So what really matters here is a possibility of a new momentum. And that's what we wanted to investigate with this survey.
In divided societies, what happens when one side dismisses the electoral behaviour of the other?
As a first step, we need to cost the properties and say, this is how much you're going to be getting.
The valuation of it.
The valuation of the property, how it's being done, and what you're going to be getting if you choose not to get it or if you cannot get it because of any reasons that we negotiate. Federalism, what it means is that we have enough in common to be in one country, but we also have differences that would allow us to run our own affairs in our own constituent states. The majorities on both sides who support it, plus the international community.
Do we think that this is the real precondition to see a change now?
If there's going to be a solution, why not work with Turkey?
Welcome to Policy Talks from Policypress, a civic journalism platform investigating how power operates in Cyprus and the region and how that affects everyday life. This podcast is where we slow things down, unpack the data, and listen carefully to the voices shaping our political reality. And today's episode is about listening, specifically listening to the Turkish Cypriot vote. Not just who won, but what the vote tells us about agency, dignity, and political direction. And why this matters now with the new Turkish Cypriot leadership, with the upcoming Cyprus's EU Council presidency. I am joined here today with Charis Psaltis and Neophytos Loizides. Could you introduce yourselves a little bit for our podcast?
I'm a professor of social and developmental psychology at the University of Cyprus. And my research interest is around bicommunal relations and how the people of the two communities view the solution of the Cyprus problem.
Yes.
I'm Neophytos Loizides. I'm a professor in international studies, international conflict analysis, and I'm working on deeply divided societies and institutions that mitigate conflict in those societies.
So happy to have you here on this podcast because I really want to talk about your research findings and what that means. So I'll kickstart this by asking, many Greek Cypriots feel that these elections that happened in North among the Turkish Cypriot community are somehow meaningless because of it being not in a recognized territory. So why is that precisely? Why that mattered that this research had to be done?
We have a problematic, I could say, master narrative in the Greek Cypriot community that everything depends on Turkey and that somehow the leadership in the Turkish Cypriot community is controlled by the wills and the desires of the Turkish government. This is partly true. Nobody could deny that, and we have lots of Turkish Cypriots who say that. At the same time, the Turkish Cypriots over decades have demonstrated their own agency. And often what we have seen in Turkish Cypriot elections is a rotation between parties in the right and parties on the left. And when we have parties on the left, we have seen that there is a momentum in negotiations. So what really matters here is a possibility of a new momentum. And that's what we wanted to investigate with this survey.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you actually, in divided societies, what happens when one side dismisses the electoral behaviour of the other?
We have a limbo and no negotiations, because how could you negotiate with the leaders of the other community if you don't recognize them? So you end up in a situation of either not having negotiations or you're having negotiations through proxies that are never productive. What often is the legitimate way forward is to acknowledge at least that the other side has an agency. We're talking in general terms here, not just in Cyprus, and engage in negotiations that are inclusive. In the Cypriot context, we have precedents. We have a history of negotiations where the Turkish Cypriot leader, whoever is elected in the Turkish Cypriot community, represents the interests of the Turkish Cypriots in the negotiations. It is a format we've been using for decades now, so there's no point in questioning this.
And I'd like to actually ask a more broader question right now for the both of you, just to, again, build that momentum to the depth that we're going to cover in this podcast. For listeners who feel nothing ever changes, what does this election say about the political climate that we're going to?
I think, one of the main findings of that research was exactly the delegitimization of the idea of a two-state solution from 2020 onwards. Mm-hmm. So, after the Crans-Montana period, what was very clear was that most of Turkish Cypriots were actually attributing the failure to the Greek Cypriot side. And in that sense, there was a huge disappointment that, Greek Cypriots don't want a solution, so we are turning into our other options. And two-state solution was also seen as a possibility. So, but at the same time, I think through the years of Ersin Tatar's leadership, we have seen a change because more and more people realize that actually this is not leading into a recognition path. So it's like a dead end, which doesn't seem to go anywhere. And we have seen a drop of about 15 percentage points in the support of a two-state solution during Ersin Tatar's period, which we think is one of the main reasons for losing the recent elections. But there are more variables actually in play that influence that dynamic. Yeah. There were other issues like the issue of the scarf that impacted on whether Ersin Tatar was seen as somebody that could support the secular identity of Turkish Cypriots or not, and he seemed to have failed that test, I would say. That's also a very important factor. Yeah. And then, usually those in leadership have some kind of disappoint many people, generally speaking, in politics. I think Neophytos.
Yeah, you have seen the pendulum going in different directions in the Turkish Cypriot elections with leadership changing every 5 years since the times of the Annan Plan. So that's a pattern we have observed for almost a quarter of a century now.
Well, that's why I really think the recent research that you've done is really important, because it does outline how in this period of time people's beliefs have changed within the Turkish Cypriot community. So we've talked about the support for two-state resolution after Crans-Montana to slowly incline, and then at 2022 it then starts to fall. Is this change, do you think, is that an emotional change, or is that a strategic move to change from going towards the two-state resolution to then again considering maybe federation?
I think it's both, actually, in the sense that there is a sense of strategic move, in the sense that, if this is not working, we have to be more pragmatic and try to converge with the will of the Greek Cypriot leadership, which now states that it's a bizonal communal federation, and also the international community. The EU, I think, gave a very clear message that doesn't support a two-state solution, neither the UN. So in that sense, that created a framework of not leading anywhere. But on the other hand, we need to take into account what happened in the Turkish Cypriot community after the opening of the checkpoints. So that's a longer time frame to think about, which is that opened new possibilities for contacting for people, new friendships. And what we study in the University of Cyprus is actually the role of contact in reducing prejudice and building trust. And we have a lot of evidence. I mean, we have tested more than 30 studies, 40 studies, most of them bicommunal, which show that contact does lead to the reduction of prejudice in Cyprus. So that process of, a new Cyprus after 2003 with the opening of the checkpoints actually gives a constant prejudice reduction trajectory for the Turkish Cypriot community, which is crucial actually in how they see the Greek Cypriots and their willingness to reunify Cyprus, to build a renewed relationship or partnership. So you see that interpersonal becomes also political to an extent. So I think it's both.
So do you think that we can say, with all this research that has been conducted within all these like time frames, are the voters with this most recent election are saying that mentally we did try a two-state resolution mentally and it didn't deliver? Can we assume that the Turkish Cypriot community has now shifted completely away from that idea?
Not really. I think if you remember our previous discussion, about 15% drop was registered according to research. So that means that still in the Turkish Cypriot community, there is a majority that supports both bizonal bicommunal federation and two-state solution. But I think given the political circumstances, that, the will of the majority of Greek Cypriots now is also turning towards supporting bizonal bicommunal federation, it is a very timely situation now that both communities converge with a clear majority on bizonal bicommunal federation. So I think that's a really key moment here.
We have never been more closer mentally and emotionally to a federalism historically, given the data we have. Federalism, what it means is that we have enough in common to be in one country, but we also have differences that would allow us to run our own affairs in our own constituent states. The majorities on both sides who support it, plus the international community. And there is a momentum in international politics in favor of reuniting Cyprus and pacifying the Eastern Mediterranean. So all these are working in tandem to each other. All these are working in favor of federalism. The two-state solution creates an impossibility because one of the two communities will not support it, plus the international community is not willing to step in and support either of the two communities in what they might want to achieve separately from the bizonal federation. So we are in this momentum where we witness, at least from the public opinion surveys, that the people are ready.
Yeah. Do we think the status quo has stopped feeling safe?
Charis might want to talk a little bit more about that. We have seen in surveys in 2020, during the Greek-Turkish crisis, that people realize, in one of the surveys we ran around that time, that the status quo is not sustainable because of the tensions that happen in the Aegean. So it's not just a status quo in Cyprus, it's a status quo in between Greece and Turkey that is affecting Cyprus as well. So there's a lot of possible confrontations that might affect Cyprus in the future. The status quo is also not working for a lot of people whose properties are in the wrong side of the divide. Because they cannot divide it. We're in a lose-lose situation because a lot of people have not access to properties or compensations, both Greek and Turkish Cypriots. People use properties that are not theirs. They don't have the titles that give them full legitimacy and ownership of these properties. When this is sorted out, more people will be in a better position. And that's one of the key drivers of the support, because we want to settle the question of properties. But more important than that is the question of security, because the current status quo we have seen several times in the past is not sustainable and could lead to confrontations.
Do we think that this is the real precondition to see a change now?
That's one of the preconditions. The settlement will come because people think that the status quo is not sustainable and dangerous to them, or also, in combination to that there are incentives that we can change the status quo. We can go from a situation that some people think is tolerable to something that is much, much better. And one could do the calculations for that, and it could provide arguments and strong evidence that a peace settlement will change the daily life of every citizen in Cyprus, Greek and Turkish Cypriot, in a positive direction, through properties, through contact, through opportunities that a peace settlement will provide.
Actually, I'm reading from this book we discussed earlier, Conflict and Change, that just came out, where we summarize this research in both communities through representative sample surveys throughout the years from 2003 until today. And if you look on one of the graphs here that describes the stance towards the status quo or the continuation of the status quo, by Turkish Cypriots. There's something really interesting in the period from 2020 until 2023. So again, Ersin Tadar's period.
Yeah.
So you see there is a doubling of the percentage of people who reject the status quo. So in 2020, it was 20%, and in 2023, it's 41%. So I think that's that exact dynamic, that we observed previously in the Greek Cypriot community during the tension around the Aegean between Greece and Turkey, the opening of Varosha, the tension in the UN buffer zone, patrol buffer zone in Cyprus. Exactly that dynamic was repeated here a few years later in the Turkish Cypriot community. And why is that? I think it's because of this situation with the properties that was created, where people started feeling insecure. People are now coming to ask for my property. What's happening here? So that some political movements that actually created that kind of uneasiness with the status quo.
And it has been consistent throughout the results, like these research.
And I think also the financial difficulties of the Turkish Cypriot community during that same period.
Yeah.
So I think, that's the more political dimension to it, in a way.
I think we can discuss about the consistency of these research findings rather than finding a result that's explosive. This is like consistently going in a certain direction. So how can we comment on that in terms of what that will mean politically?
I think the more constant, positive trend is the one related to the opening of the checkpoints, the creation of new friendships. Just to give you a number, today, if you ask Turkish Cypriots, do you have a Greek Cypriot friend? The percentage of people who say yes, it's about 50%, actually 1 in 2.
Yeah?
Yeah. Back in 2004, just 1 year after the opening of the checkpoints, it was much lower. In the Greek Cypriot community, the percentage of people who now state they have a friend from the other community is about 25-30%. Again, back then it was much lower. So what does that tell you? It tells you that every year new relationships are building, and this is cumulative through the years, because obviously people don't lose their friendships so easily.
Yes.
So every passing year, this builds up. And because Cyprus is a very small place, in social psychology and anthropology, we talk about the strength of weak ties. So there's a network of people that is expanding, that has not only direct contact, but also indirect contact. Indirect contact is, let me give you an example. I might not have a Turkish Cypriot friend, but maybe my best Greek Cypriot friend has a Turkish Cypriot friend. So through this extended network, you get to know people and the way they think, and it creates the prejudice reduction effects and trust building we see also through direct contact.
Yes.
The other big trend is with people who have lost properties. In the past decade, we have seen increases in the value of properties in Cyprus, massive increases, massive inequalities.
Yeah.
And this creates a frustration to the people whose properties are being kept hostage because of the negotiations.
Yeah.
Because you might have properties that can change your life fundamentally from one day to another. And you cannot do much about it because it's either on the Greek Cypriot side and you're Turkish Cypriot, or the other way around. This can have massive consequences for the lives of people who are in this situation. And our research has shown that the numbers of these people who are affected is increasing because of intermarriage and because of inheritance. So on the Greek Cypriot side, we calculated, that was 10 years ago, that 51% of the population has some kind of refugee status, either through intermarriage or descendants or properties or so on. This is much higher in the Turkish Cypriot community. So there's a lot of people who are affected fundamentally by the status quo and by the stalemate in the negotiations.
And and as you have outlined as well, it is actually a small geography with a rather small number of population of people that we have. So the instance, for example, like 5 Greek Cypriots being detained in the north with their property search also did directly show on the border crossings and numbers and everything like that. Because your research period also included that time period, did you observe anything going slightly down in terms of
I mean, there was a slight decrease of crossings at that period of tension.
Okay. And drawing back to some references to the other divided communities and the examples of that, how rare is the situation of Cyprus and where it is right now, if we are to draw some comparisons and contrasts to be able to actually shed a more objective light into seeing what it is?
Yeah, it's actually very rare. The support for federalism around the world, when negotiators, mediators introduce it, is very it's not strong. In fact, a lot of societies will oppose federalism when it's introduced in the negotiations. When we have seen federal experiments, those were introduced by outsiders like Iraq, which, by the way, now is doing much better than any of its neighbors. It's doing financially very well. But when it was introduced, there was a lot of resistance, and the history followed later on with ISIS and interventions and so on. Cyprus were very lucky to have already an agreement that was negotiated in the late 1970s, to have UN resolutions, to have the commitment of political parties for the most part, and to have the support of the people. So in what is very, very common in divided societies, in negotiations that are happening in divided societies, is that nobody expects or nobody predicts a peace settlement. I know no cases from survey polls and predictions around survey polls that someone would say we're predicting a peace settlement in Northern Ireland before the Good Friday Agreement. Nobody would do that because everybody expects that they will fail like never before. And this is what we could witness here in Cyprus as well. We don't realize how close we are in the negotiations, because if you put all the elements together, we have Crans-Montana very close to reaching a settlement. Right? 95% is the argument, has been resolved in Crans-Montana. Then we have increase in support by the people. And then we have an extremely favorable international environment, because the big bosses do not want to have another confrontation while Ukraine is happening, and they want to use the Eastern Mediterranean as a gateway for natural gas and energy going to Eastern Europe. So we have everything in place, almost everything in place to have a settlement, but we don't realize that we're very close, because we don't have the comparative perspective. I think if there is a prediction of one big issue to be resolved in the next 10 years, that will be Cyprus, for the reasons I mentioned. Now, the question is that predictions do matter, but predictions by themselves are useless without political agency. That's where we need to concentrate, I think.
Yeah, and we have doubled in and out of a few elements we've talked about how Turkish Cypriots voted, why they voted. We've talked about what this research could also mean for peace talks a little bit, but I really want to do a deeper dive into this. Not in theory, but in political reality. What negotiation approaches are no longer viable from a voter perspective when we look at the research? Has process without progress lost legitimacy? Because if there is a momentum, but it's not followed up by the political actions, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, about the next political steps that are now needed to be made.
I think the electoral campaign by Tufan Human was ingenious because he introduced a frame that allow the Turkish Cypriot community to support federalism, but not unconditionally. He said if we don't go into peace settlement, then there shouldn't be a return to status quo. So there should be something new. So in a way, he brought the possibility of some kind of limited recognition closer, something that all the Turkish Cypriots would agree, and he provided the pathway to do so. So electorally, that was ingenious because he secured the federalist vote, who was the biggest, but also managed to gain supporters from the center and from those who were not just federal supporters. They wanted something different. No return to status quo, some limited attributes of autonomy, and so on. So electorally, that was ingenious formula. However, the problem with that is that right now is not acceptable to the Greek Cypriots, because they will say, why should we engage in a negotiations that gives you a positive outcome only to you? The response to that is either to reject the approach and turn our back to the Turkish Cypriots. You got 62%, but sorry, we cannot accept it because that's not common in negotiations. That's one approach, dismiss it. And the other approach is to be creative and to say, if the Turkish Cypriot community, the Turkish Cypriot leadership wants to have a backstop, no return to status quo. Backstop is a sort of insurance mechanism. But if negotiations fail, we're going to get something. We create a reciprocal backstop, where both the Greek and Turkish Cypriots will gain something in negotiations. And they will gain more if the other side is seen as responsible for the stalemate. Charis and I, along with Rol Kaimak and Meltemon Kansamani, have produced some work on this that shows in detail what these backstops could look like and how they become reciprocal and equal, and how they can take into consideration also the overall behavior of sides in the negotiation. The key idea is the following. Both sides will gain something from the negotiations.
Yes.
So we don't do negotiations just to talk. There will be benefits on both sides. That's a core idea. And those benefits will be decided on the basis of how each side performs in the negotiations. So we want to incentivize sides to enter, if they enter the negotiations, to be serious and deliver in their promises. We don't want to be in a situation where they behave as if they're negotiating, but they don't provide serious understandings and concessions to the other side. So this is the idea that we thought in terms of the process. I don't know if you, Charis, want to talk a little bit more about the details of this.
No, I think one element we could add here is that there is something that both communities really need in that sense, and it could be what you called an early win. So for Greek Cypriots, an opening of Varosha for under UN, for example, could be one significant gain, early gain in that process. And for Turkish Cypriots, some kind of limited opening of Ercan under some kind of UN or EU administration, although I'm not an expert on that part. But, the idea, basic idea is that both sides can get something in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then they can start building trust and negotiating, and depending on their behavior, on how they seem to be good-willing and accommodating to the needs of the other community, they could be rewarded, even by an external, arbitrator.
Yeah, these measures require some kind of supervision.
Yes.
From outside. But what we also find in our surveys is that increasingly people are okay with that, because that gives them the security that the arrangement will endure over time. I remember, this is not only for the people, I remember a few years back, I was having lunch with a senior Turkish diplomat, and I brought the question of Varosha, and he told me Varosha will not be a confidence building measure, it will be a confidence destroyer measure. So it's always a fear that these measures might bring more conflict. And to avoid that, we need some kind of acceptance that will be a supervision from outside and will be making the final decision. Otherwise, we can trap ourselves in a situation of conflict and no return. And both sides must be aware of this possibility. But the idea, if anybody has time, can go into one of the AI models and look at what kind of growth it will bring for the Turkish Cypriot community if Varosha opens up, or how much growth an airport in the north will bring to the Greek Cypriot community. The benefits will be immense for the economies on both sides. The interactions, the trade, the contacts that will come with that will bring investment and growth that we wouldn't imagine for the next decade. So these are fundamental for the Turkish Cypriot community that would take away their rent and whatever compensations in addition they had to pay in the future, because for every minute, even now that we're talking, every minute counts in terms of compensations for the owners. So all these are key to the two communities coming together. But the fundamental question there is that after the election of Tufan Erhuman and people siding with the formula of no return to status quo, do we want to reject that and go back to the old format of negotiations? Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Or do we want to take advantage of the voting of the Turkish Cypriot people and say, we hear you, we understand what you're saying, we would like to change it, and we want our own interests to be accommodated, and we create a formula that is win-win for both communities, that has benefits for the Turkish Cypriots the day we start the negotiations, and has benefits for the Greek Cypriots the day we start on the negotiations. Nobody loses, both sides win, and we move forward in a way that allows us to understand each other better in the future.
Yes, and I do actually want to talk about this because we've been discussing that there's this like momentum created now that has been better than ever, with research results showing that there is now more than 70% plus in support and tolerance.
75%.
75%.
Yeah.
I was thinking whether this tolerance is now enough to sustain hard compromises. And whether it comes to negotiators, would they be willing to take on such approach as you've described?
I think here a line of research initiated by Neophytos and his colleagues when he was at Kent and now at Warwick is the so-called conjoint analysis, which is a method that can actually go beyond the general support for a form of solution and actually identify the specific elements of a peace package that could be accepted by both communities. So we have done this research back in 3-4 years ago, and we repeated that very recently. Actually, in that research we were discussing earlier in the Turkish Cypriot community, that happened just a few months before completing another similar research in the Greek Cypriot community that included that element of conjoint analysis. So we are now in a position with two different research projects to identify what kind of variation of the Guterres framework can actually be accepted in a referendum from both communities. So we know and we have identified specific elements that we can talk more about if you are interested, of how that peace package that could be accepted in a referendum could look like.
So essentially what we did is that we're very excited with Charis's findings about the rising support for federalism. Yes. But the question is, what you ask, are they going to support the same federalism? And let's see whether we can throw in the hard concessions, the hard compromises into an experiment, public opinion experiment. This is, by the way, one of the most established methods in the social sciences, so we haven't invented it. It's something that people use across. We introduced it in deeply divided societies and Cyprus specifically in a publication with Charis and colleagues in 2022, and we repeated it now. So to take it one by one, we look at the questions of political equality and different models of effective, what we call effective participation by the United Nations. We look at territorial concessions, and we look for security and guarantees, and we look for compensations, as well as the deadlock resolving mechanism. The latest survey also look at energy questions. So we put all the compromises together, and we experimentally tested them to see whether we can have a more detailed subversions of Crans-Montana that would be acceptable to the two communities simultaneously, at least from a public opinion perspective. And some of the key findings there from the latest survey that we have done also in the Turkish Cypriot community not only tell us that it's resolvable, the Cyprus problem, but exactly how it could become resolvable, what kind of support mechanism we need in Cyprus from the international community, what kind of implementation work we need to do in order to get into a settlement that both sides will feel comfortable with.
Yes. We've talked a lot about the communities. We've also talked about how, from the international perspective, there is also more of a need, as well as maybe an urgency of things becoming more stable and towards a resolution in these days. So what role could European frameworks play in restoring this? Because we now see Cyprus having the presidency term in the next 6 months. From a European framework, how do we see that play out on the Cyprus negotiations and peace talks?
I was reading the Greek Cypriot negotiators' interview yesterday in two newspapers. And I think he was making an argument about the importance of the EU representative appointed recently, Mr. Khan, to become more involved in the process. I don't know whether this will be accepted by the Turkish Cypriot side or to what extent, but I think the minimum we need to have there is what we had in Crans-Montana, which was that, making sure that any solution agreed will be in line with the European acquis. There will not be any contradiction in functionality issues. So I think that's really important to have as a horizon. And I have seen statements by the Greek Cypriot leader who seems to suggest that, we want the EU to play a role, and we are ready, being in the presidency of the EU now, to talk to Turkey, although I know that this is not actually seen by Turkish Cypriots always in the most positive light, because, earlier we discussed the agency of Turkish Cypriots. And, sometimes these kind of moves are interpreted by Turkish Cypriots are not actually subtracting from their own agency when Greek Cypriots are asking to talk directly to Turkey over their heads, in a sense. So that's a bit of a tricky issue. I understand that politically. But I think, if there is ideally a kind of give and take between the EU and Turkey, I think it could actually be a catalyst for the solution of the Cyprus problem.
Yeah, the international community is very important also in terms of compensations. Ideally, we like to have, in this round of negotiations, a rough idea, if you wish, a security, that if you don't get your property as an owner, Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot, you're going to get a fair compensation, and how much this fair compensation will be. I leave the issue of getting the property back separate. But as a first step, we need to cost the properties and say, this is how much you're going to be getting.
The valuation of it.
The valuation of the property, how it's being done, and what you're going to be getting if you choose not to get it, or if you cannot get it because of any reasons that we negotiate in the meantime. That would register in people's mind as an alternative, as a second best alternative if they don't get their property back. And I think it's very important to have the properties properly costed and secure the funding for that, internal and external. So that's number one. And we have seen that the more compensations, obviously, you provide to owners of properties and to those who might lose their right to use a property, they're more likely to get the settlement through, because people think of their personal situation as a question of fairness as well for those people who have suffered disproportionately for the past 50 years. That's number one in terms of the international community. Number two is the degree they can be involved in the monitoring and implementation mechanisms and the guarantee status. We have seen in the surveys that having the motherlands involved, particularly on the Greek Cypriot side, is problematic. And the question is that if everything else works for the Turkish Cypriots, can we find third countries that could guarantee in a reliable way and what would be the reliable way, the security and the implementation. In this formula, we have seen that there are three possibilities. One is EU countries being involved heavily. The other one is having NATO, also within the zone of acceptability on both communities. And another option is to have countries from outside Europe and NATO, countries such as Australia, Japan, Canada. We have done a lot of work with these countries as well, and there is willingness for them, for their own strategic interest, to be involved again in Cyprus. The reason being that they themselves see that the global system is very insecure, and they would like to contribute to European security in return for future support from the EU. So what I was saying before is that there is a complementarity of interest worldwide with our willingness and wish to bring peace in Cyprus.
Yeah.
And if we understand how the global system works, we can better serve the interest of the negotiations as well.
There's also an interesting and important regional dimension here in the Eastern Mediterranean, because in the recent research we completed with a conjoint survey, as Neophytos mentioned earlier, we added one of the dimensions being energy cooperation in the East Mediterranean. And there you see a very interesting finding that if you ask Greek Cypriots whether they would be ready to collaborate with Turkey on an energy issue, for example, before a solution, usually they would, in their majority, respond no. But if you actually add that element of cooperation between Cyprus and Turkey as part of a peace package, so, with all the other elements of a federation being in place, and ask them, so this is the package that will be applied, and at the same time, we will have this agreement with Turkey on the issue of hydrocarbons. So we'll extract the hydrocarbons, they will go with a pipeline through Turkey to the EU, for example. Then you get a majority support in the Greek Cypriot community. So that I think this is really important, because it shows that also Greek Cypriots are pragmatic in that sense.
Yes.
And can see their interest.
Yes.
So if there's going to be a solution, why not work with Turkey? But not before, because we don't trust Turkey. You see
exactly. There is a strong emotional stance to it, but once it actually offers a pragmatic solution that will benefit everyone, suddenly the same proposals sound something that's like acceptable.
They become rational and acceptable,
Yes.
And actually we're presenting that on the 21st of January at the London School of Economics, Hellenic Observatory.
Great.
That's where we will present this more formally.
Look forward to it.
People interested,
Look forward to it. So there are a lot of signals everywhere from the community, from both communities, and from the international interest. Can we talk about what will happen if these signals are being ignored in the political sense? If they're not acted upon, if these findings are not taken into account to consider new negotiation methods, if the communities and all of these things that we've discussed, if they're not taken into account. It
would be a pity, because if you think about it, we have 2 years of prime time with no elections. Turkish elections will be in 2028. American elections, Greek Cypriots will be voting for presidential elections in 2028. Greek elections will be 2027, but they're not as impactful. So we have a lot of time ahead of us to negotiate, and we have a favorable international environment. So I don't think anybody could ignore the signals. I think we're beyond that state. What will happen is that each side will be tested. Each side will be tested in terms of its willingness to support the settlement, and the side who doesn't engage in negotiations would also face some kind of consequences. You might not be the consequences that the Turkish Cypriots imagine if the formula that was proposed by Tufan Erhuman will have been introduced, but there will still be consequences. And for the Greek Cypriot side, that means a continuation of the status quo, with the international community feeling that Greek Cypriots are responsible. For the Turkish Cypriots, it would mean that another moderate Turkish Cypriot leader will fail, the third in sequence, if the Turkish Cypriot leadership does not meet some of the Greek Cypriot fears and expectations. So it's going to be a lose-lose situation. And do we want to have a lose-lose situation when we have a formula that could be from day one win-win on both sides? And that's a question one could ask. Why engage in negotiations that will fail and engage in a protracted back and forth with no positive results when you could clearly enter negotiations and win and have benefits from both communities?
Yes. And that's why your research has been key in what it presents and the results, findings. And so I'm excited. What else is under the radar to do research and develop findings on?
AI, Ramesh AI is something new we want to test in the near future. You know, now with the AI revolution, research-wise, it has become much more easy to actually do large-scale focus group discussions. So imagine having around a virtual table, hundreds of people, both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, speaking to each other in their own language, translated immediately in the other's language, getting ideas from them, and thrown back to the other community, testing them immediately, and reaching a consensus within an hour. So that's what Ramesh AI is doing. It's a new platform that we tested in Cyprus around these issues. And our plan is the near future to actually implement it more widely.
There are different ideas, several ideas in mind and projects. One involves using animations in public opinion survey. Charis and the University of Cyprus have developed an online panel now. So it's easy to send people a link where they can fill up the survey. The same we're going to do in the Turkish Cypriot community. So if we do so, then we can also introduce animations where for a complex issue, we can show a short video, 2 or 3 minutes. And then we ask people's response to a small video that describes, for instance, how political equality, the complex concept of political equality that very few people understand, make it understandable through
visual explaining formats.
Visual explanation with 2 examples from Belgium, let's say, and Northern Ireland, with very different systems, and then try to see which system they will consider more viable for the case of Cyprus. So animations is one of them. AI is another one that Charis has mentioned.
The return project, the comparative element of that is immense. So maybe you could say a few things.
So looking also for the convergences that we can get in terms of the returnees, people who might want to be potential returnees on each side of the divide, and under what conditions return will happen. Looking at it again from conjoint experiments or
Neophytos is very modest. He doesn't want to say that this was an ERC project, but because of Brexit, it was transferred into another scheme in the UK. But he's the PI of a huge comparative project about the return of refugees and IDPs around the world in how many countries?
8 countries. The interesting, the most relevant aspect of this in Cyprus is that we have seen in surveys with Charis over years that the return intentions are present. They're growing also in the Turkish Cypriots. A lot of Turkish Cypriots are thinking of why not to move to a place like Larnaca or Limassol, because there is business there commercial opportunities, life is interesting. I have a house from my grandfather that I can use, or grandmother. So we have potential returnees on the Greek Cypriot side who would like to live in the future Turkish Cypriot constituent state or in areas under territorial area adjustment. And what we find in previous surveys is that those are in the so-called, we call it Goldilocks zone, meaning that they are not insignificant. It's not 5,000-10,000 people that we say we're going to ignore it. It's not in the hundreds of thousands that will change the demographics. They're significant enough to bring the two sides together,
Yeah.
create a meaningful interaction, right? We have so many people from different parts of the world who live now in Cyprus. There are going to be additional people moving in and contributing to the development, but these are indigenous people who know the lands and they have emotional connection.
Yeah.
We're going to make these people happier. We're going to make our citizens happier, Greek and Turkish Cypriots. We're going to give them more options. A Turkish Cypriot will wake up in the morning and say, I'm thinking of moving to Paphos, because Paphos now is the place to raise a family. So this is a type of life we want to have post-settlement with regards to returnees. And this is the scenarios we're going to be testing to see how people feel with the prospect of return and what will make it more viable in the future. So that's one area that we're going to be investing our energy and time. Another idea is another topic that we're looking at is the questions of arbitration and enforcement. Arbitration was seen, particularly in the Greek Cypriot discourse, as a negative. Element in the negotiations. If you remember, there was even in the declaration that no arbitration will be done. However, we increasingly find that if you have a small issue in the negotiations, you don't want it to be lingering forever. So for issues that are not very important for the survival of both sides, and where you can have a person with technical skills that will come in and provide you a final solution that is win-win, then you might want to have that kind of mechanism. That would take a lot of pressure away from the politicians. What we also suggested over time is that if we create those deadlock mechanisms, deadlock resolving mechanisms, arbitration mechanisms, we can also take into consideration, that was an idea from a London-based Greek Cypriot lawyer, Konstantin Bartasidis, we should take into consideration the degree that each side implements the agreement. So if we're going to have an element of enforcement and arbitration from outside, we could also make decisions in the future in this body on the basis of how each side implements the agreement. So what is the biggest Turkish Cypriot fear? Greek Cypriots will not implement. What is the big Greek Cypriot fear? Turkish Cypriot and Turkey will not implement. But if you know that your legal entitlements in the future, in future decisions, will be tied to how much you implemented the agreement, you're going to think twice.
Yes.
As Greek Cypriots. If I vote Elam tomorrow and they don't implement the agreement, I'm going to be losing legal entitlements and legal decisions for the next 10 years. I'm going to have consequences for the next 100 years.
Goes back into the pragmatic thinking and then removing some of the emotional predispositions.
Exactly. So we can test the people by providing people the right set of institutions. We can test their true intentions. That's the idea.
Great. And could you maybe briefly mention about the book that you've recently published?
Yeah, sure. You see, this was a book co-edited with Professor Brady Wagoner in the University of Copenhagen. It's comprised of two parts. The first part is a synthesis of 20 years of research in both communities of Cyprus about how attitudes change and the role of contact in changing attitudes, and also what kind of solutions people of the two communities are ready to accept, reject, like one state, two states, bizonal, by communal federation, continuing the status quo. And on the second part, there is a series of commentaries by colleagues around the world commenting on what is proposed in the first part, where there is a theoretical framework we propose as genetic social psychology. So that means essentially developmental social psychology in understanding how the dynamics of relationships between groups and within each of the two groups changes through time and also, from birth to death of an individual. So that's also the developmental dimension to it.
Yes.
This is a book that gives us a confidence to move forward.
Yeah.
And this is a book that I highly recommend to not just the Greek and Turkish Cypriots, but anyone involved on the Cyprus question right now from abroad. Because the big question, as you asked before, is why the international community should care given everything that is happening. And how do we mobilize interest in ministries of foreign affairs in Europe, in Asian countries, in democracies around the world, in the American administration. And we need this type of scholarly documentation in order to have a discussion with stakeholders around the world and tell them Cyprus is a place where you should pay attention in the next 5-10 years.
Yes, thank you very much for this session.
Thank
It was
you.
great. And you've been listening to PoliCY Talks.